Nandi stood in the dim light of the office bathroom, her back aching as she scrubbed the floor. The smell of cleaning products hung thick in the air. Her daughter, Zanele, sat on the floor nearby, clutching a book she'd been too tired to read. At just 11 years old, Zanele carried the same heavy weight her mother did, a burden of uncertainty about where their next meal would come from and whether they'd still have a roof over their heads by the end of the month. Nandi had only secured this cleaning job 2 weeks ago at a high-end office building in Johannesburg. Life had been unforgiving since the death of her husband, Sifo, 2 years earlier. She often thought of him, of their plans to open a small restaurant together, of the way he used to laugh when he dreamed about their future. But his sudden passing left her in ruins. The funeral expenses, their meager savings, the spiraling debt. It all came crashing down. Now, eviction loomed over her once again. She owed 2 months of rent, and the landlord had threatened her just that morning. "One more week, Nandi, or I'll throw you and that girl out." His words cut deeper than he probably intended, but it wasn't the first time she'd heard such threats. As she rinsed out the dirty mop, her mind wandered, drowning in fear. Zanele glanced at her mother, worry etched into her young face. The girl had learned not to ask too many questions, but her silence weighed heavily on Nandi. Suddenly, the bathroom door swung open. Nandi, startled, yanked the mop too quickly, and the bucket tipped over, sending water cascading across the floor and soaking the feet of a man in a crisp, tailored suit. Nandi froze, her breath catching in her throat. "I'm so sorry," she blurted out, reaching for a towel. The man's face twisted with disgust as he looked down at his drenched shoes and trousers. His anger was palpable. "What the hell is this?" he barked. "Do you even watch where you're going?" Nandi's throat tightened. "Please, sir, I didn't see you. I'm really sorry. I'll clean it up right away." The man, Thando Mahlangu, was no ordinary businessman. He was the CEO of the company, and his time was too precious to waste on such incompetence. At least that's how he saw it. He was known for his strict, no-nonsense demeanor. And today, running late for an important meeting his patience had worn thin. "Clean it up? You've ruined my suit," Thando snapped. His cold eyes flicked towards Zanele, who stood silently in the corner. "You're fired. Get your things and go, now." Nandi's heart sank. Fired? She couldn't lose this job, not when she was already drowning in debt. She opened her mouth to beg, but no words came out. She gathered her supplies and took Zanele's hand, leading her out of the building in a daze. As they walked the long, cold streets back to their small apartment, Nandi's mind raced. What would they do now? She had no other job prospects, no savings, and no way to pay rent. Zanele walked quietly beside her, but Nandi could feel her daughter's worry hanging in the air. How had it come to this? That evening, after tucking Zanele into bed, Nandi went to her neighbor's apartment and asked her to watch Zanele for a few hours. She needed to speak to Bongi, her childhood friend, who had helped her get the cleaning job in the first place. Maybe Bongi had another lead, another opportunity. Nandi's pride had been shattered long ago. She wasn't afraid to ask for help anymore. She had no choice. Bongi greeted her warmly when she arrived, but quickly saw the despair in her friend's eyes. "Nandi, what happened?" Nandi poured out her story in a rush. "I don't know what to do, Bongi. I got fired. I have no job, no money. The landlord is kicking us out next week. I don't want to go back to the shelters." Bongi sighed deeply, her brow furrowing. "I'm so sorry, my friend. I know how hard things have been for you." She paused, thinking for a moment. "But maybe there's something. A friend of mine mentioned a family looking for a live-in housekeeper. It's a big house, fancy place. They're rich. I think you can bring Zanele with you. I'll give you the address. Nandi's hope flickered, fragile and hesitant. Are you sure? You think they'll hire me? Bongi gave her a reassuring smile. I'm sure. Just go tomorrow morning. You've got nothing to lose. The next morning, Nandi woke Zanele early, dressing her daughter in the best clothes she had. We're going to do our best today, okay? Nandi said, trying to sound confident, though her heart was heavy with anxiety. Zanele, always quiet, nodded and gave her mother a small, serious smile. As they approached the address Bongi had given, Nandi's steps faltered. The house in front of her was massive, a sprawling mansion surrounded by well-kept gardens and a high gate. It was the kind of home Nandi had only seen in magazines or through the windows of expensive cars. She hesitated at the gate, a wave of insecurity washing over her. I don't belong here, she thought, her hand trembling as she pressed the buzzer. The gate opened after a moment, and Nandi led Zanele inside, walking up the grand driveway. A middle-aged woman in a neat uniform greeted them at the door. You must be Nandi, she said kindly, introducing herself as Mrs. Van Wyck, the head housekeeper. The house was even more intimidating inside, high ceilings, polished floors, and chandeliers that seemed to sparkle in the morning light. Mrs. Van Wyck led them through the house, explaining the job. The family is away for now, but they'll return soon. You'll be responsible for cleaning the common areas, the guest rooms, and managing the house. It's a lot of work, but you'll have a small apartment in the back for you and your daughter. Nandi nodded, feeling both overwhelmed and determined. She had no choice but to succeed here. She immediately set to work, scrubbing the floors and polishing surfaces with a vigor fueled by desperation. Zanele helped where she could, quietly dusting shelves and tidying small spaces. As Nandi moved to the living room, something caught her eye on the mantel, a framed photo. Her heart stopped as she recognized the man in the picture. It was Thando, the same man who had fired her just the day before. Her hands shook and she dropped the cleaning rag. What was he doing here? Was this his house? Panic surged through her, and she considered grabbing Zanele and running out the door, but before she could react, she heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. The front door opened and footsteps echoed through the hallway. Thando had come home. Nandi stood frozen as Thando walked into the room, his eyes landing on her. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally, a flicker of recognition. You, he said, his voice cold and measured. What are you doing here? Nandi's mouth went dry, and she stammered, I didn't know this was your house. I'm just here to work, sir. I'm so sorry. Thando raised his hand to silence her, his gaze hardening. First you spill water on me, and now you show up at my home? Are you following me? No, sir, Nandi said quickly, her heart pounding. I swear I didn't know. My friend told me about the job. I just needed the work. Thando was silent for a moment, his eyes moving to Zanele, who stood quietly by the window, watching the exchange with wide, anxious eyes. He hadn't noticed her the day before. Is this your daughter? He asked, his voice softening just a little. Nandi nodded, her throat tight with fear. Thando sighed, rubbing his temples as if trying to process everything. He glanced at the clock on the wall. Finish what you're doing and leave when you're done. I'll pay you for the day. Relief flooded Nandi's chest, though it was tinged with disappointment. She nodded and quickly got back to work, her hands trembling as she scrubbed the floors. Zanele helped in silence, her worried eyes following her mother's every move. As Nandi finished scrubbing the last of the floors, her mind raced with a whirlwind of emotions. She had survived the day, but the uneasy tension still lingered in the air. Thando's presence loomed over the house, and every second she spent there felt like borrowed time. With trembling hands, she gathered her cleaning supplies, her heart heavy with uncertainty. How had fate led her back to this man? The very one who had stripped away her only means of survival was now offering her a day's pay under his own roof. As she and Zanele walked toward the door, Nandi cast one last glance around the grand house, knowing that this was only the beginning of something far bigger than she could understand. But what would tomorrow bring? Could she truly navigate this unfamiliar world? Could she protect her daughter from the storm she felt brewing just beneath the surface? When Nandi finished cleaning, she found the day's wages on the counter. She clutched the money, grateful for even this small mercy. But as she and Zanele were about to leave, Thando appeared in the doorway again. "Wait," he said, his voice stopping her in her tracks. Nandi turned, her heart in her throat. "Yes, sir?" Thando's expression had softened, though it still held a hint of the cold man she had met before. "How much do you owe your landlord?" The question took Nandi by surprise. I'm 2 months behind. 20,000 rand. Thando nodded thoughtfully, as if making a decision. "I'll pay your rent for the next 3 months, on one condition." Nandi stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Condition?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You work here full-time as the housekeeper," Thando said. "You and your daughter can live in the apartment. I'll pay you a fair wage, and you'll be able to stay on the property." Nandi felt tears welling up in her eyes. This was the lifeline she had prayed for, but fear gnawed at her. Could she really trust this man? Could she work for someone who had shown her such coldness before? Still, what choice did she have? "Yes, sir," she whispered. "Thank you." Weeks passed, and Nandi settled into her new routine. Every day she worked hard to keep the massive house clean and organized. Mrs. Van Wyk was kind but strict, teaching her the ways of the house and making sure everything was in order. Zanele too seemed to thrive in the new environment. She had her own small room in the apartment, and she spent her days exploring the garden or reading the books she'd been given. Nandi saw a light in her daughter's eyes that hadn't been there in a long time, and for that she was grateful. But despite the sense of stability, Nandi couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong in this world. The house was too grand, the people too distant, and there was another, more pressing concern. Naledi? Naledi was Thando's fiancée, a strikingly beautiful woman with an air of confidence that made Nandi feel small. She often visited the house, and while her interactions with Nandi were polite, there was a coldness in her gaze that Nandi couldn't ignore. It began with subtle comments. "You've settled in nicely, haven't you?" Naledi would say, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Thando's too kind for his own good, but don't get too comfortable. This arrangement won't last forever." Nandi kept her head down, avoiding confrontation. She reminded herself that she was here to work, nothing more. But the tension was building, and she knew it was only a matter of time before something happened. One evening, after Zanele had gone to bed, Nandi was cleaning the living room when Naledi stormed in, her face flushed with anger. In her hand was a piece of paper, which she shoved in Nandi's face. "What is this?" Naledi hissed. "You've been receiving money from Thando? Large sums of it?" Nandi's heart sank as she realized what Naledi was talking about. Thando had been helping her with Zanele's school fees and other expenses. It had been a gesture of kindness, but now it was being twisted into something ugly. "I didn't ask for it," Nandi said quietly, trying to stay calm. "He offered to help." Naledi's eyes blazed with fury. "Help? Is that what you call it? You're taking advantage of him. You think you can worm your way into his life, into this house? You're nothing but a charity case." Nandi swallowed her fear, standing her ground. "I'm not trying to take anything from you," she said firmly. I'm just doing my job and taking care of my daughter. Naledi stepped closer, her voice lowering to a venomous whisper. You think I don't see what's happening? You're trying to steal him from me. But I won't let that happen. You don't belong here, and I'm going to make sure you're thrown out where you should be. Before Nandi could respond, the door to the living room opened, and Thando walked in. His eyes flicked from Naledi to Nandi, and his face immediately darkened. What's going on? He asked, his voice calm but stern. Naledi whirled around to face him. She's manipulating you, Thando. She's taking advantage of your kindness, and you're too blind to see it. Thando's face hardened. That's enough, he said sharply. Nandi isn't manipulating anyone. I helped her because she needed it, and it was the right thing to do. Naledi's eyes filled with fury. You're a fool, Thando. You're letting her into your life, and she's going to ruin everything we've built. Thando sighed, rubbing his temples. Naledi, we need to talk. Naledi looked at him, her expression shifting from anger to fear. What are you saying? Thando's voice softened, but his words were firm. I'm saying that this isn't working. Us. You've been trying to control everything in my life, but that's not what I need. I think it's time we go our separate ways. Naledi's face twisted with disbelief. You're ending this? For her? She spat, gesturing toward Nandi. This isn't about her, Thando said calmly. It's about us, and this relationship isn't what it used to be. For a moment, Naledi stood frozen, her hands clenched into fists. Then, without another word, she turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. Nandi stood in shock, unable to believe what had just happened. Thando turned to her, his expression softening. I'm sorry you had to go through that, he said quietly. Nandi shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean to cause trouble. You didn't? Thando said, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. This was long overdue. The weeks that followed were quieter, though the tension from Naledi's departure lingered in the air. Thando became more present, often joining Nandi and Zanele for meals or spending time with them in the garden. There was a growing connection between him and Zanele, and Nandi couldn't help but feel her heart soften toward him. But as much as she enjoyed their moments together, Nandi couldn't shake the feeling of uneasy. What if Naledi was right? What if this was all too good to be true? One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Thando broke the comfortable silence. Nandi, I've been thinking a lot about us. Nandi turned to him, her heart skipping a beat. Us? Thando nodded, his eyes serious but warm. You and Zanele. You've become more than just my housekeeper. You've become my family, and I care about you a lot. Nandi felt her breath catch in her throat, her mind spinning with conflicting emotions. She had felt something growing between them, but she had never dared to hope that it could be anything more than a friendship. Thando reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, opening it to reveal a simple, elegant ring. I know this is sudden, he said softly, but I love you, Nandi, and I want us to build a life together. Will you marry me? For a moment, Nandi couldn't speak. Her heart pounded in her chest and tears filled her eyes. This man, who had once been a stranger, was now offering her and Zanele a future she had never dreamed possible. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling. Yes, I'll marry you. Thando's face broke into a smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as the last light of the day faded. The wedding was small, held in the garden of the mansion, surrounded by close friends and family. As Nandi stood at the altar, holding Thando's hands, she felt a sense of overwhelming gratitude. She had been through so much: loss, struggle, fear, but now she had found a place where she belonged. Zanele stood beside her, beaming with pride. The girl who had once been weighed down by uncertainty and fear was now thriving, her smile brighter than ever. As Thando kissed her, Nandi knew that this was only the beginning. There would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time in years, she felt like she could face them with the man who had given her a second chance at love and the daughter who had never stopped believing in her. This was their second chance at life, and they were ready to embrace it together. The end. Thanks for listening.